Hello, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive Series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Pam Lange, and today we have with us Frances Bearden. Welcome, Ms. Bearden.
Nice to be here.
How are you?
Fine.
Now, we talked about how we would start out, and I thought it would be interesting to find out a little bit about your childhood, where you were from, and how you managed to get to SMU.
All right. I'm from Central Texas, a small town near Waco, Mart, Texas, where I was reared. And my parents had lived in Dallas for a brief period right after they were married, and knew some people at SMU. My mother had gone to Southwestern in Georgetown.
Yes. Methodist.
Right, Methodist, yes. So, at any rate, when I was finishing high school, approaching finishing high school, the question of where I would go to college was being discussed at the dinner table fairly often. And my mother had a call from Dr. McGinnis, who was on the English faculty here. He had been one of her professors at Southwestern, and he asked where I was going to college. And we weren't sure, she told him, so he said, come up to Dallas and let me show you around SMU. So that's how I happened to come to SMU.
Great, and you were an English major too.
When I got here I was, yes.
So what year was that?
That was 1940, the fall of 1940 when I came.
1940, so that was kind of a monumental year in the history of the United States.
It was.
Different things going, right.
The last year before the Pearl Harbor.
That's right, that's right.
So actually it was fairly relaxed around the campus. I think most of us were a little too young to be too apprehensive about what was going to happen.
Yeah, so you really didn't have any thoughts of war or anything like that?
Not seriously. It was certainly being discussed, and some of us had boyfriends who had gone off to the service already. But anyway, the campus was, of course, smaller and classes were smaller. And I lived in one of the dormitories. There were two women's dormitories then.
Do you know which one? Do you remember?
I was in Virginia Hall.
Virginia Hall, and that's the same place that is now.
It's still Virginia Hall.
Still Virginia, that's right. Virginia
Snyder. The dormitory that's closest to Hillcrest.
That's right.
And it was quite different.
Did you have lots of rules? Yeah. What were some of the rules that you had?
Some of the rules. Well, when you were freshmen, you couldn't go out more than 2 nights a week. Yes.
Yes.
But you could sign out to go to the library.
So that was a good trick.
Had to be back at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
If you would study at the library. But
did anyone try to break the rules?
Oh, of course.
Of course, yeah. And you had to sign out. Now, did you?
Yes, we did have to sign out. As a matter of fact, I had a job, and I was at the front desk in Snyder Hall during that year. Oh. So I was seeing to the girls who were coming and going and signing out and returning and so forth, so taking their phone calls.
You had to do all of that, so you knew who was there and who was not there. It was
a great way to get acquainted. I knew everybody.
I'm sure.
They knew me.
I'm sure. Now, did you have a dorm mother or?
Yes.
What? Yeah, I'm sure.
One in each dorm.
One in each dorm.
Right.
Was there a dean of women? I'm sure.
Lyde Spraggins was the dean of women.
Right.
She was the dean of women for a long time.
So it was a much different kind of world than it is now. And obviously there were no co-ed dorms. Oh no! No shock. Of course. Did you have a dress code, if you remember? Did you have to? Could you wear slacks, or was not?
I don't remember that we wore slacks to classes. We could certainly wear slacks in our free time and for sports activities, but I don't believe we wore slacks around the campus. I don't remember it. I know I had to wear hose when I was working at the desk.
Oh, did you really?
Present a dignified appearance for the delivery people who would come.
Yeah, and the people signing in and out.
Right.
But it was a different world. It was a much more formal,
it really
formal
was.
world.
Yes.
What about, did you have to go to chapel?
Yes, we did. We had chapel in McFarland Auditorium.
Wow.
And it was, quote, compulsory.
That's right.
I don't think they could check rolls very carefully, but we were supposed to go once a week.
Once a week. Now, where I went to school, we had to go 3 times. How about that? Much more.
Yes,
yes. A little more pious. But What about, the other thing I was interested in, what about the food? Now we have a cafeteria where you line up and you can have an assortment of things downstairs.
That was not the arrangement when I was a freshman. Any time I was in college, we were seated at tables and
yeah. Did you have people
yes,
serve? Yeah,
people serving.
And family style.
Mostly students who were. That was one of their ways of making some money part-time.
And I don't know when that all changed, but it was certainly
after my time.
Yeah, that's yeah.
It's true. The whole time I was.
You had the family. Did you eat in the dormitory, or
yes.
did you did? You had the meals right in your dormitory.
Yes, Virginia Hall and Snyder Hall had one big dining room, and it was in the basement of Virginia Hall, and that's where we were served.
So and they had a kitchen there, or did they? I guess
yes,
they did. They cooked. Was the food good?
Sometimes it was.
Exactly.
It was very acceptable, I would say. We didn't complain about it
Didn't
much.
complain.
Might get a little monotonous, but I think they tried to do a good job.
Were the rules different for the boys? I think probably, right?
They were looser for the men or the boys.
They didn't have to sign in and out, or
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but
I never heard it mentioned. No, it was just the feminine.
The women were very tightly, and I guess all that changed in the 60s, I would think.
After my back was turned, yes.
That's right, nobody noticed all of this happening.
It is.
But it did, it certainly did.
Yes.
It's like you have a look into a different world. How many dorms were there on campus, do you remember? There were the two women's dorms?
I think there were just the three. Atkins Hall, it was called Atkins Hall, it's now Clements Hall, but the Atkins Hall was the men's dorm.
Okay, so they just had one men's dorm and two women's dorms.
That's right. There were fraternity houses, and some of the students who were in fraternity houses.
They lived there.
Could live there, yes. And probably some of the men probably lived off campus in rooms if they could find them, or apartments. I'm not sure about that.
Right, but probably as freshmen they had to stay on campus.
I imagine so.
I would think so.
Yes.
You know, I don't really know that either, but so, and what about the Greek life at SMU? Was it big at that time?
It was not as big as it became later. We didn't have sorority houses. There were some fraternity houses, but there weren't any sorority houses. And the sororities had their meetings in rooms that they could rent from whoever.
Yeah. So that all happened after the war. The big boom in the sororities when those houses were built. I guess in the
yes, the houses were built a good bit after.
They would have had to be right.
Right.
So SMU was a much smaller community.
It was. Pretty well
I assume it was much cheaper, to say the least. Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. I know it's hard to believe that if you. I don't know if you can remember how much it was, but even when I came here, it was something like $600 a semester. Can you believe that? Now it's just, I know it wasn't
my scholarship. I had a scholarship. I had been valedictorian in my high school class, and that gave me a tuition scholarship to SMU or any other university around the state. So I didn't have to worry about that.
Well, that was good. So you had, and I don't know how much they would give away in scholarships or whatever, but I just know the fee in general was much cheaper, much smaller than it is now.
Yes.
Now you said, you told me earlier that you were an English major. What was the English department like at that time?
I liked all the professors that I found there. There were two women professors whom I studied under, Miss Fitzhugh.
Oh, yes, Nanny Fitzhugh.
Yes, Nanny Fitzhugh. And Dr. Heron, Emma Heron.
I'm a Heron.
And I studied with Dr. Lisey and John Lee Brooks and Mr. McGinnis and another man whose name escapes me at the moment, but I thought I had good instruction in English.
That's good.
And in fact, I liked all my professors all over the campus.
Did you have other requirements too? Did you have to take? You just had.
We had to have some math.
Math.
I think we were. I'm not sure how much was required, but history and math and another language. I took Spanish. And then my major, and then a few electives. And we also were supposed to take physical education for at least 2 years.
Oh,
as
yes,
I
that's
recall.
right. I remember that. And all these things, of course, have remained the same, and yet they've also changed. They have, the requirements are basically the same, but between 1940 and 2005, we've seen gigantic
Yes, we
changes
certainly have.
in everything.
You and I have youngsters who have
That's
children
true.
who have been through college within the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and you know the difference,
we know
right?
The difference.
So it's
we
almost
see the difference. Yes.
incredibly different. What happened on campus after Pearl Harbor? You were here. Did the
Yes, I
men
was
all
here.
enlist, or what
They,
was it
they
different?
left fairly fast. Pearl Harbor hit on a Sunday afternoon, as you probably recall, and it was a pretty day here in Dallas, one of those nice
Oh, yeah.
sunny December days, and I was sitting out on the lawn in front of Virginia Hall with some friends, and somebody opened a window and said,
Wow.
"The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor," and a lot of us were saying, "Well, where is Pearl Harbor?"
I didn't know where it was.
Things changed fairly fast. Some of the professors went off to
They
serve. And as you say, a lot of the young men who were, maybe some of them were previously enrolled in training programs and were still able to be in college, but they began leaving fairly
Because that was
fairly
the thing to
quickly.
do, to enlist.
Yes.
And then there was a draft and everything. But at first, I think people were just patriotically wanting to sign up.
That's right.
And so in the next year, I guess campus was kind of sparsely
It really
populated.
changed, of course. The Atkinsall, the men's dormitory, became a dormitory for Navy personnel. We had
Really?
a V-12 program on the campus, and they stayed there. And I don't know exactly what happened with the women's dormitories, but I know they had to find some extra space for women. Maybe one of the, maybe both dormitories, women's dormitories, were turned over to the men. I know I lived off campus for
Oh, did you? Because of the
last year.
war?
Yes,
That there was nowhere to put people.
right, and the university arranged for spaces around the community where they could find
Yes.
apartment.
So
But-
it kind of changed your idyllic.
Yes, right, it did.
Yeah, it was-
everybody's idyllic.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it was like a cataclysm in the
Right.
and
we adjusted to it, I think, easily, and didn't complain.
no, because you were young. And that's
Right.
yeah. And so you finished up in then at the regular time in 44. Is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
actually, I finished a semester
Early.
ahead. I was graduated in January of 44, and went to work here in Dallas at the Dallas Museum of Fine Arts, as it was called then. And my husband-to-be was out there. We hadn't decided we were to-bes, but
No, but you happened to meet him.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And so we married about a year later, and we lived in Dallas ever since. He died in 1980.
Yeah,
but,
much too young.
Yes, but
Yes.
I've stayed on in Dallas, and I've really enjoyed my association with the university for all
Great.
these many years.
Yeah, because you live nearby, and we'll talk about your
Yes.
husband a little bit. But you had where is your house? It's on.
It's on Amherst
On
Street,
Amherst.
just a few blocks away from the university. He was teaching here at the university when we built our house.
Right.
It's a wonderful location.
It is, and a great investment.
Yes, I think so.
And another person that has a lot of connections with SMU, Art Swank, designed your house too.
That-
I just thought I'd
yes.
get that in now. But
All
we,
right.
we'll back up a little bit. But
And we had a little faculty get together there because Jerry Bywaters, who was head of the art department, lived in that block, and so did Lon Tinkle.
Oh,
and,
that's right.
The French professor. So
uh-huh.
we had lots of SMU connections right in our neighborhood.
And that's kind of a wonderful thing to have all those people like living right nearby.
It was nice.
Well, let's
It
talk a
was-
little bit about your husband, Ed Bearden, who was a very well-known artist, a
Well,
fine artist. In
yes.
fact, I showed you the picture they had on the internet. When I Googled
Yes.
Ed Bearden and Fran Bearden, I found this beautiful
Yeah, thank you for
picture.
that.
Yeah, at the Tyler Museum of
Yeah.
Art. So.
He was at the museum when we married, and then he started teaching at SMU part-time. and then he decided he'd rather be just associated with the university. So he taught in the art department at SMU for full-time for about 15 years, I guess.
Okay, and his style was, I guess you would call him they called him the Texas regionalist, or
Yes,
he's like Jerry
I think-
Bywaters,
yes.
Otis Dozier.
They painted landscapes mostly and figure paintings, and that, it was sort of pre-abstract.
That's right. That's what I was reading in this. The notes. It said, well, these were very popular before World War II and during and right after, and then all the abstract movement
Right.
came in, and they were. But now they're really coming back.
Yes, their things have a way of going on
They do,
cycles, don't they?
They do, and SMU is very fortunate to have the Bywaters collection and all of that, and a lot of things by Otis Dozier, because Dallas at that time was very active in art, wasn't it?
Yes.
What was the museum like at that time?
Well, it was
back when Ed was there.
Right. We didn't have a very big permanent collection at all, so we had a lot of changing shows that Jerry arranged for, borrowed from other museums. There would be traveling shows, and quite a number of Texas artists participated in shows in, say, Houston, San Antonio, and those would circulate around the state. So you could get pretty well acquainted with your fellow artists in the state that way, what they were doing, as well as seeing them personally. Of course, Austin had a very active art colony with its big art department at the university. And Houston did too.
Houston did too, so there was a lot. Did that ever go national? Or they stayed in Texas pretty much?
It was mostly regional, yes.
But it's wonderful when you look at those pictures. It's
Yes,
such
it
a
is.
wonderful history of
Right.
the place, the history of the place. Where was Ed born?
He was born in St. Louis.
St. Louis, okay.
And he came to Dallas, his family came to Dallas when he was, I think, almost ready for high school. So he went to high school in Dallas and then went to SMU for his college education.
And he was an art major, so we did have
Yes.
an art department,
Yes, yes.
but it was small. Where was the art? Where was that?
On the third floor of Dallas Hall.
That's what
on
I
the
thought. So all of that was
East Wing.
Okay, everything together was in Dallas Hall, pretty much. Is that where?
That's
yeah.
right. The English department was on the second floor, and just above us was the art department.
The art department and the
then right
theater
across-
department up there too.
Yes,
because he had that.
McCard Hall, that
Yeah.
little theater place. We had
The Arden
Yeah.
Playhouse, right?
Right.
Right. So he had he always wanted to be an artist?
He had a lot of talent as a youngster. You can see it when you look at his early drawings. He had a wonderful art teacher in high school, whom people still talk about, who studied here in Dallas. Her name was Eleanor Benners, and I think Otis Dozier studied under William Lester, several Texas artists who are very well known.
Studied in what high school was that?
Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, Woodrow Wilson. Okay. So he lived in Lakewood then. Yeah.
He was not a Lakewood rat, though.
No, good. I'm glad we'll let that go unremarked on. I remember hearing about the Lakewood rats, but that was after the time I lived,
Well,
before the
your
time I
you-
lived in Lakewood.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
I'm not sure what the dates were. But
Must have been after World War II.
It must have been, I guess, yeah, the little gangsters, which
Yes.
is hard to believe. They were not supposed to be gangsters. But Ed, when he was at the museum, he was assistant director.
Yes, Jerry Bywaters.
Jerry
Bywaters
was the director.
Right.
Okay. So he was painting? He was painting all this time as well as
Yes.
trying to do this administrative work. Did that work out too
Lived
well?
a full life.
Yeah, he did.
It worked out pretty well. Yes.
So what were you doing at this time? When you first, he was the assistant director. You got married, and then were you
I
still working?
stayed on at the museum after we married until I was expecting a baby. And
Oh, yes.
so then you went home in those
That's right.
days.
So, yeah, there was no working after that. So you didn't ever go back and
Not full time, no.
not full time. No, you had the.
I had another child not long after the first one came, so I was pretty occupied with domestic
Exactly.
affairs for a good while.
Now, when he came back to SMU, full time, was the art department still in Dallas Hall up on
Yes,
the third
it
floor?
was.
Because
Yes.
he wasn't here. Was he here when the Meadows
No, he was not with the university when the Meadows
No.
collection came in, and when the things started moving in the
down to the So
new
that
building
was
that
so
was
he
nice.
was kind of one of the original. What kind of a studio situation did they have? Did they just do fine painting, or did they do everything like they have now, only on a very limited scale? I guess that's
Very much the same as what they do now. They just had smaller studios, fewer students, and there was a lot of sketching outdoors too.
yeah, right. Going in there. And did he? And so he worked with the students, the art majors, and I just know from what I've heard, and I have friends who are artists too, that there was a lot of, did he do private tutoring too? Like people would go down to the museum, there were Otis Dozier and Jerry and I guess Ed too, all taught down there.
Ed taught a class at the museum. His class was for high school students. And Otis taught there, and Octavio Medellin, the sculptor, taught there, and there's other people who conducted classes. There was studio space in the museum at the time it was built. There were these really very nice studios for teaching, and we would have visiting artists come to the museum from time to time, maybe have a show of their work, and they would conduct master classes for whoever was interested in coming. So that museum had a lot of extra activities in the art field.
That's true. I know that from some of my friends that went down there and took classes as children, and they would talk about that. They would always a friend of mine when I lived on Westminster, she had gone and taken classes at the museum. So coming back to SMU, did SMU draw in people from the community too? Do you know for the art classes like they do now? They had
I don't think so.
No, not at that time.
I don't believe they did. Continuing education program started a little later.
Okay.
But I think mostly the art classes on campus were for the students.
For the students. So all of these, what we know as the Godby lecture series, or all these things that came in after, after World War II, and I guess there was a huge boom of students coming in after that, and Ed probably
yes, that's
he
true.
was working with all of them,
right?
And having.
I'm sure there were some of the teachers in the art department who gave private instruction to maybe students they thought were especially talented, but there wasn't anything structured about it that I recall.
So as a faculty wife, I guess, with little children, were you part of the art community, I guess you would say, in Dallas? You had the social life, and did you have
friends
friends and all of that? Was that pretty much linked with SMU, or did you keep up your
It was certainly coming from an SMU base, and friends we'd had here at SMU, and then other people. Dallas was growing. New people were coming in.
Sure. So it was a kind of an exciting.
Right, it was.
An exciting time, and it was a good time. But did Ed stay at SMU, or when did he leave?
He stayed about 15 years, I believe, and then he opened a graphic art studio, a commercial art studio, and kept on at SMU part-time for 2 or 3 years, and finally decided he'd better cut his ties and devote himself to business.
Yeah, so that was I guess that was kind of a hard decision to change.
It was.
Yeah, but it may be necessary.
Well, seemed so at the time. SMU was trying to establish its departments on a more professional basis, so they needed people who could commit full-time.
I see. So it was a good life, I guess, of doing, but it sounds like he had a life of doing a lot of different things at once.
He did, yes.
Yeah, and he probably liked that, but was he able to did he have to devote a lot of time to his own work, or was he having to do these other things too? Was it easy for him? Some people can do that. They can write.
He could do that.
He could. That's good.
It worked pretty well for him.
So
and if it got to be too much, he'd just slow down.
He would just slow down. But that's a wonderful story to hear that about a time at SMU that we kind of forget about. I mean, don't forget about it. You just don't realize the incredible change.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, he passed away too young. But you remained in Dallas. You kept up your contacts with the university. What did you do?
for a year, about 2 years, I guess, I worked for the community course program at SMU.
Okay.
Do you remember that? It was sponsored jointly by SMU and Temple Emmanuel, and I was the secretary in that office.
Do you remember what year that was? Was that the 8?
It was probably in the 70s.
70s, okay, okay.
And it was convenient for me. We were living in this house we built, and I could run back and forth to SMU without taking much time. Ed was working elsewhere, so that was nice. And after that, I went into mostly volunteer work.
Okay.
I worked at the downtown library for a while as a volunteer, and I've done volunteer things at SMU also.
Right, and you said you were became interested in the colophon and Friends of SMU Libraries.
Yes, 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 I did. I had been interested in it before, but one of my friends was president at one time, and she persuaded me to come help her out.
Good.
Unquote.
Yeah. So what did they do at that time with the Friends? Do you remember? Well, what were you doing?
We were having similar programs
like they have
to what they have now with authors, book design, and
especially like fine books and collections. And
you're right.
Okay.
Some of us went into bookbinding, not on the campus here, but
did you do that?
I did some bookbinding for 2 or 3 years. I wasn't very good at it.
Well, but it's all that type of thing.
It made me respect beautifully bound books more than I had before.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't think it's not my thing to do it. But I've looked at some things on marbling and all of that too. It's very, very, very interesting.
Right.
So you have maintained your connection with the university, and it's a good spot.
It is for me. I really enjoy it. I worked at the Meadows building for a while too, when the Greer Garson Theater was getting ready to open. I went over there to ask if there were anything I could do, and they really put me to work.
Good. Yeah.
They were sort of understaffed for what they needed to do to get that theater open and subscriptions in and so forth. So it was fun. It was an exciting time. I enjoyed it.
Great. Well, of course, you can always count on SMU to be understaffed. Well, not really, but like right now, they're trying to put you can think of your next task of helping with putting the archive together if you're interested in that. That's what they've a vast quantity of stuff to try to sort out.
I can do that.
Well, yeah, you'll have to at the DeGaulle. I mean, they have an archivist, but still, I think it's a daunting task. There's quite a lot of things that are, opening now because they're getting ready for the 100th anniversary.
That's true. They are.
The centennial.
Hard to believe, yes.
It is, isn't it? And the university was very young when you got here, and
is it 2007? That's the centennial.
No, I think it's going to be 2011. I think there's a couple of different dates, but that was I think the earlier one. I think that's what they're trying to get ready for. Do a history and then really put all this material together that they have in different attics and stuff.
One of my uncles was in the first class at SMU.
Oh, really?
We, as I told you, the older siblings in my mother's family went to Southwestern, and then when SMU opened, one of them came to Dallas and enrolled at SMU.
The first year. Well, that's
he became a doctor later, and in those days you didn't have to stay in college 4 years before you went to medical school. So
you didn't? Oh, that's nice.
I think he sort of skipped around to go to medical school early, so he wasn't here for 4 full years.
But he was in the first class. Well, I guess things have certainly it changed in that regard too, through the qualifications and everything. But you sound like you've had a great education here, and you.
I hope so.
And you've maintained all your interests that you started here?
Yes, I have.
Literary,
I've met so
artistic.
many wonderful people. Many of them are still around and still good friends.
Yeah, and you're part of what we call the SMU family.
I guess so, and I'm pretty active in the alums in my class whenever there's something going on there.
How many come? Do they have a?
It seems as if they've sort of lost interest in that class since we had our 50th anniversary.
Oh, well.
Turned around.
That was last year.
No, it's been 60 years.
Oh, that's right, 60. I'm counting wrong. So it's been a while. Yeah, but they still they still communicate.
Oh yes, yes, we get lots of letters.
I know.
Announcements.
It's fascinating.
Golden Mustangs is
The
what
golden, is that way? Okay.
after you're 50.
After you're 50, you're a golden Mustangs. And looks like it's just really a pleasure to talk to somebody that has used this SMU education as a, as kind of a foundation for a life of the mind,
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's great.
Really is.
And I think we have had a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for coming. We'll have to do it again.
All right.
Great.
To be continued.
To be continued, right.
Thanks, Pam.
You are welcome. That was fun.